Hello, everyone. We're going to get started again. Maybe people can grab their seats in the next minute or so, and we'll get started. It's quiet. So we turn this up. So we've had a good series of speakers this morning. Practicing my loud voice, and we benefited from some discussions this morning with respect to hearing about India, hearing about what's happening in China and how to access that market. We've got a number of Canadian companies that are starting to come to the foreground and that are having their own learning experiences in terms of going to the world that they can share with us. And I think a really important aspect of the community that we're creating here is to learn from each other. And we're really fortunate to have three outstanding speakers in this next session to teach us about the opportunities, teach us about the tribulations in terms of going international, and help others kind of make their way into international markets so that we can be successful as a group. So just to introduce myself, my name is Brian Courtney. I'm an interventional cardiologist. I'm one of the co-directors of the Medventions program, and I'm also a co-founder of a medical startup company by the name of Medical that some of you might be aware of. And I'm just delighted to see the turnout for today, the range of people that are here today, and we're going to get going on with our next session. So our first speaker is very accomplished in the space of medical technology innovation, probably one of the real stars in the Canadian landscape with respect to commercializing medical technology. Arun Menawat is currently the CEO of Profound Medical. It's a publicly traded company that does treatment of prostate lesions, and they've got a significant involvement in Europe, and that'll be a key theme of his talk. Another very notable component of his career is that he was involved as the CEO of Novadac, and Novadac was I would say a mid-sized company, but certainly an anchor tenant company for Canada with respect to medical technology innovation. They went through a bunch of different clinical applications for their technology to image and assess blood perfusion of various tissues, and that technology and that company was recently sold to Stryker after being publicly traded in Canada for a great many years. So it's a real pleasure to introduce Arun. He's going to talk to us about his experiences in Europe and impart some knowledge to us. So thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here, and Brian, thank you so much for inviting me. I think this is most certainly a passion for me to help the next generation of entrepreneurs in our country. And I'm delighted to sort of talk about some of the things that we need to do in terms of commercializing. And the talks this morning, by the way, I learned a lot, and they were fantastic talks. And I think that certainly one of the takeaways for me is that in the world of tomorrow, the United States is not the only market in the world, that it's going to be China and India, and the innovation from Israel is quite amazing. In fact, I have the pleasure of chairing a company out of Israel by the name of Alminda, which is an amazingly innovative company. So I hope that what I'm going to talk about this morning will kind of give you a little bit of a perspective on how these innovations can be commercialized and what I see in the world. Most of you are scientists of one form or the other. And as scientists, we tend to think in terms of workflows, in terms of methodologies, in terms of 1 + 1 = 2, and so on. And the world of commercialization actually does not follow those rules. And so at one point, as I was thinking about preparing for this, I was thinking maybe I need to sort of share with you some workflow. But as I thought about it, there really isn't. So instead of doing that, I'm going to sort of do case studies. So I'm going to share with you companies that have successfully done things. And my hope is that it can be a little bit interactive as we go. So you heard about a number of things these days. You've heard about value-based healthcare. You've heard about evidence-based medicine. You've heard about the fact that many of these internet-based companies are looking at providing more information to the patient. This picture here is The Economist. This is the front page of The Economist last week or this week, and it says the next generation of doctor is actually you. So you can see this is a world that is not linear by any means. And they're really, the other thing that I hope you can see is Michael Porter, whose title I've listed here, is one of the most respected strategists in the world. He has been at Harvard University for several years, and he wrote the first book on business strategy, which is that 5-force model. If you're those of you who've been in MBA class, I'm sure know him really well. And one of the first articles that he wrote on value-based medicine or systems was in 2005. And so this topic has been around for a long, long time. And, you know, when I was working on trying to grow companies in my life, I used to read all these articles. I used to go to investors and say, you know, this is what the future is. And these investors would say, yep, this is what the future is. Here's some money to go do something, and so on. But when I would go to the hospital, it was an entirely different situation. Or when I would go to CMS in US to talk about paying for our product, it was an entirely different story. So for example, Brian mentioned the last company, Novadak. Our value proposition was we would improve outcomes, and thereby the cost of surgery would come down because patients would not need to stay in the hospital, and would not need repeat surgeries, and that's expensive. On Wall Street, played very well. When we went to CMS, they said, you know, that's all good, but I'm only supposed to pay you if your costs go up, because my model at CMS is cost plus. So if your cost is coming down, I'm actually going to pay those hospitals less. And I would go to the hospital and say, well, you know, maybe you'll get a little less, but you'll still make more profit. And they said, that doesn't work. Those people that I hire, they get paid full time. I can't go to those people and say, well, you'll only work 30 hours a week instead of 40 hours a week. So what I learned early on is that all of this is great and it's beautiful at the high level. But in reality, I don't think there are many people who know what value-based systems mean. I don't think there are many people who actually know what evidence-based medicine means. And I don't think that all of that on a day-to-day basis really works as we're building the company. And you can see the examples from this morning, right? How many people talked about any of this? Everybody's talking about a new system, a new way of doing something, a new way of treating patients. And ultimately, actually, that is really what works. And so let me share with you the first example. So this is a company, Intuitive Surgical. It is the world's most successful medical device company in history. And I don't think most Canadians actually know about this company. So this company's stock was wrangling at about $1 for a long, long time. Let me share with you the value proposition of this company. They do robotic surgery. So they brought the robot to the operating room for the first time. And when they brought the robot to the operating room, the costs actually went up. A typical robot is sold for $1.5 million. The typical cost of maintaining that robot is about $350,000 a year. The typical disposables that you purchase to do the surgeries for this robot is about $4,000 per patient. And you could do all of the same surgeries without the robot using minimally invasive techniques that would cost you almost half as much. And yet, it's $43 billion company, and you can see the valuation. They're bigger than many, many medical device companies that are out there. I think they're number 6 today. So the value proposition, what was the value proposition of this company? I'm just curious if there's anyone in the audience who knows about this company. Okay, what's the value proposition?
Fine question.
Right, let me share one more fact with you. The government of Canada actually explicitly has said that they will not pay hospitals in the United States to buy the robotic system. And why? Because they actually are trying to do outcomes-based medicine, and they're saying, well, there is no clinical value to this system. There's no reason, there's no benefit to the patient, there's no benefit to the healthcare system in doing so. So here it is. They are growing in double digits. If you look at the big consolidator companies, Medtronic or J&J, they're really happy to be growing at 6-7%. Intuitive Surgical is growing at about 12 to 15% per year, twice as much as other big companies. In Japan, they started selling in the last couple of years. It's selling like hotcakes. Every quarter, they exceed expectations of the market. Right? And there are over 3,000 or 3,600 robots now. There's hardly any hospital in the United States that doesn't have one. Okay, so the message really is that it is, in fact, it has three things going for it. It is great for the surgeon. It is absolutely great for the surgeon. Why is it great for the surgeon? Because the surgeon actually sits on a computer console to do the surgery. And at the end of the day, after they've done maybe 3 procedures in one day, they're very comfortable. They can go out and play tennis. So that's one of the value propositions you don't want to forget, is technologies that succeed are great for the users. And that don't forget the value to the surgeon. The surgeons, if you think about surgery, it's a tough work. They're standing, they're doing all kinds of things with their hands. And many of them, by the time they're in their 50s, quite frankly, have 2 problems. One of them, they might have some physical problem, backaches and so on. And second, they are bored with doing the same thing. So if they're sitting here and they're doing something that is very high tech, and every few months the sales guy comes in and says, hey, I've got this new software, I'm going to upgrade this robot, and with this software, now you can see a little bit of this and that. It's very interesting. It's very, very interesting. So yeah, I think that this is what we read about, but this is the real world. Okay, and I know this might be very interesting. I hope it's opening some eyes for you today. So as I thought about, what is the roadmap?
May Dirk Burns please return to A alpha ground MRI.
Right.
Attention please. May Dirk Burns please return to A alpha ground MRI.
All right. Okay, so what I thought about is this is I think in my mind what is interesting. In Medtech, the innovation really requires evangelization, and it really requires parallel processing. And you will probably ask me, well, what does evangelization mean? And so I thought that I would talk at the high level of what are the different elements when you're thinking about this. So a lot of times people say, I have great technology, and they think if you have great technology, it will produce great results. But you really need to recognize the difference between what your technology does and what are the advantages. And those advantages could be in any direction. They could be in the direction of patient value. They could be in the direction of surgeon value or physician value or whatever it is. I think knowing what it is critical. Clinical data is certainly important. And I think that I could probably show you 20 examples of companies where clinical data didn't mean anything and they became successful. I think in terms of economics for the client, what is the reimbursement, what revenue they have, what is the cost structure and profit. I mean, this is pretty straightforward. But I want to sort of share an example with you. When we started selling in the early days, in the Novadag days, I was selling to Duke University at the time, actually. And they were very interested. They are among the big name hospitals. And when I presented to the surgeon community, all loved it. I went to the office of the CEO, and he said, "Look, I'm trying to get this certain surgeon to join Duke University. I want you to go to him and convince him that he can join the Duke University and buy him whatever he wants. And if he wants this, I'll buy it for him." Right? So the point being that sales actually happens in the trenches, and strategy may happen in the boardrooms, but sales actually happens in the trenches. So you do need to recognize what value you're bringing to the hospital and what economics are they bringing to you. There was another CEO that I talked to, and I talked to him about the fact that we could reduce the length of hospital stay. And he said, "Look, Arun, I'm not a hospital. I'm a 10-star hotel. I'm very expensive hotel, and I got to keep my hospital filled with patients. That's how I make my money. Don't ever forget that." That was a straight line. But my point is that if you think about these explicit topics, what you really need to do is find out from these what is your value proposition, and then figure out your strategy based upon that value proposition. There's no cookie cutter model. That is my message. So let me share with you a few other case studies in which I've been involved. So these are the 3 companies in Canada that I've been associated with. The Sidara software was the first one. And the model for Sidara software was that we had a product that we called the Windows for Medical Imaging. And it was, in fact, fairly straightforward model. And the idea was that in the early days of medical imaging, we were able to write all of the communication protocols, all the links, the basic software that a company might need to run an MR or CT scanner or ultrasound or PET imaging that was evolving during the early 2000 timeframe, and to be able to go to these companies and say, you don't need to write all of this. We can give you a sort of like a built-in set of programs, and you can then write on top of this. And the first issue that came up with was that we were trying to sell it to the engineering departments, and the engineering department's message was, well, you're actually my competition. The guys from Toshiba, for example, would not even go come meet with us because they said, you're taking jobs of my people. If I buy from you, you're taking jobs from my people. And it took us a while, but we finally figured out that our value proposition really was time to market. That this is a period where medical imaging was growing at a rapid pace. Most CEOs wanted to bring newer products every 3 years. And we simply changed our message to going to the C-suite and simply saying, we're not about saving money. We're actually about time to market. We can help you get time to market because we've already written all of this. All we have to do is write the user interface on top. And once we figured that out, it just took off. Everybody got into that message. And we narrowed our proposition to we're about time to market. And when we narrowed that proposition, we sort of also changed the way our software was written, because all of a sudden that customer, the engineer, instead of becoming our competitor, was our customer. And we were writing code to make sure that whoever would write the user interface on top of our software was really easy, that the manuals and all those were written really well. So that is just one example of how the time to market value proposition was very different than just the proposition of selling a product. Novadac was, I've already shared a few things with you, but in the end, what we were trying to do is we were trying to say, this is a very fast way of imaging. It's really reliable product. We had great engineering team. It is very safe for the patient. We can also show perfusion, not just blood flow, and perfusion allows you to figure out where you can see abnormal tissue, normal tissue. In the end, a lot of that actually didn't really matter. what really mattered was when we found the breast surgeon. What really mattered was that that breast surgeon could design the best breasts of all the patients who had cancer. And it was all about psychology because, and I understood it really well once the breast surgeons explained it to me, because their point was these women have a traumatic experience when they undergo cancer. I want to be able to rebuild them to the point where they were the way they were before the cancer. That's really important to them. So none of this was interesting, but once we were able to show perfusion, that outcome of them, their ability to design the breast properly to the original shape was really the way we were able to get the beachhead going. I want to share one more example with you about Novavac. So I shared the example of Intuitive Surgical. And in the topics that I mentioned to you earlier, one of them is the quality of the investors that you get. I recognize that a lot of times we have to go get money. So we take money from anyone. But there's a connection between Novavac and Intuitive Surgical. Not many people know about it because I did not do a good job of marketing the company. But the imaging system of that Intuitive Surgical, the best company in the world, was actually developed by Novavac and was exclusively manufactured in Vancouver and shipped down to the Bay Area for incorporation into the Intuitive Surgical robotic system. It's something that I'm actually very proud of. But the part of why that story is very interesting is it didn't happen because I was a good salesperson going to Intuitive Surgery and saying, buy our fluorescence imaging system. It happened because we were on Wall Street, we were presenting our story, they were loving our story. And one of the investors called me and he said, hey, you should talk to Intuitive Surgical. And my market cap was about $20 million, and Intuitive Surgical at that time was about $5 billion. And I said to him, I said, yep, that's going to happen for sure. They're going to say, you're another one of 500 companies that call me every day. And he said, no, it's going to happen because I own 6% of that company. And I'm going to call for you. And that's the value that the investors can actually bring. And it actually did happen that way. He called them. The vice president of investor relations called me within 5 minutes. And he said, I've received this call from New York. I need to meet with you. Can we come over? Intuitive Surgical management didn't go to see anybody. Everybody went to see them. They came to see us. That's how it started. And how you start, the better you start, the better you finish. And so I recognize that money is money, and a lot of people say green dollars are green dollars, but who your investors are can make a huge difference in how you build a company. And I can go on quite a bit about this. But the company that I'm really excited about right now is Profound, and I'm honored to be the CEO of the company. And this is a company that I actually, in the last 2 weeks, finally have spent some time in New York, and I'm actually presenting this company as the next thing beyond Intuitive Surgical. And I can tell you already some very interesting stories about this. So T. Rowe Price they own about 10% of this $43 billion company, and these are not my words. These are the words from their management saying, you guys really are doing something that is going to be the next thing. And then the next thing really is that with Intuitive Surgical, the surgeon sits at the console and they move their fingers and the robot moves itself at the patient. But with Profound, actually we take away that role of the surgeon. The surgeon sits there and watches the screen, and the system, the software actually does the ablation process itself. So at first I thought that would be something the surgeons are not going to like. But come back to the original point that I made at the beginning of the talk. The Intuitive Surgical robot was the best thing for the surgeon. And when I came actually here to Sunnybrook, and watched the urologist, Dr. Klotz, do the procedure in front of me. He actually wanted his picture taken when he was actually pressing the button at the point where the computer could take over. Because his point was, that's great. Now this guy can go do it. I can go do my email and can drink my coffee and I can plan my next patient. So that was quite amazing to me, that in fact this product can get has a lot of value for the surgeon, and that's partly why I'm excited about it. So what I'm trying to do is present to them that when intuitive surgical robots started with prostate surgeries, and basically you remove the prostate. And so one of the messages that I created was, well, 20 years ago, you, Mr. Surgeon, used to remove the prostate with your hands, and today you remove it with your robot. What's the difference? What have you really done for the patient? Yeah, it's less invasive, and yes, it's great for you, but what have you done to advance the science? And I think this is the first time. These are interesting images from Profound, but we're ablating the prostate. These are images, so in the background you see the MR image. In the front you see a temperature map of the patient, and you see a round prostate in the first image where we're ablating the whole prostate. And the boundaries are drawn by the surgeon, and then once the surgeon draws the boundaries, the computer takes over and ablates the whole thing. But what it really is doing is, for the first time, it gives them a choice. So instead of the surgeon being a scientist, I kind of start to call them like, you guys now get to be artists. You can now figure out whether or not you want to remove the whole prostate or you would want to remove part of the prostate. And it is a parallel to how 20 years ago, if a woman had breast cancer, the whole breast would be removed. And today, hardly ever a whole breast is removed. And today, we're in that paradigm with prostate today, where the whole prostate is removed if the patient has a prostate cancer. But now you can remove half of a prostate or a quarter, or if you have radiated patients, you can remove that. If you have severe BPH, the patients with maybe 100 cc or large, 3 or 4 times normal size of prostate, you can remove the upper half and you can maintain all of the functions. And so the reason I think that the value proposition is not science here, the value proposition is not any of the precision, it's really the flexibility and the artistic features of this technology that we'll be able to bring to them. The other thing that I wanted to show you is, we're not trying to own the world. What we're saying to them is, I'm not here to take the robot that you love so much. What I'm saying to them is, this is how the market is defined, and I'm just looking for you to take that mid-tier patient and deliver that. And if we can do 40,000 procedures per year, it will mean $100 million of revenue. Our investors will be happy, our engineers will be happy, our salespeople will be happy. And once we get to the 100 million revenue, we'll go figure out how to own the world, but we're not gonna try to figure that out on first step. And so that's the other part, is how we're positioning in this company is unique in the sense that first thing I say to the surgeon is, I'm not here to take your robot, I'm here to augment it for those patients where it makes more sense to do it. And that also, by the way, that means intuitive doesn't come on my case. And then this is the one picture that really, really resonates. And resonates both with the surgeons and with the investor community. And the picture really is that point that I made, 20 years ago, you were removing the prostate with your hands. Today, you remove your prostate with a robot. Why can't you not just go from a robot that is probably old technology now to a new robot, which is driven by software, and just sit at a console and you can do a procedure in 2 hours. And everybody all of a sudden gets the point that all I'm really trying to do is move the surgeon from one console to another console. And the biggest change was really done by Intuitive, where they moved the patient from the surgeon from the patient to the console. That was the biggest change. So this is part of my message to you, is really, you need to really figure out what is it that will be ultimately your value proposition. And my last point is that I think having a global network of really big name hospitals and big name surgeons, and really building great relationships with them, and not just building relationships in terms of going out to have dinner with them, but really grilling them, why do you like this product? Why do you like my product? Why do you want to work on this product? I was at the Radiology Society meeting, and the radiologists working with us were all there. And my first message to them was, I know our product is not very good. And their response was, no, we think you're ready to go. And I kept asking him, why is it ready to go? And the point was, I wanted to understand what the issues are. I mean, I think our product is great, but I wanted to understand the issues. And this was one of the ways that we were able to sort of get to the issues, and these relationships really matter. And, you talk about going to CMS for reimbursement, you talk about all of this. It matters more who goes with you to CMS. It matters more who goes with you to the FDA. It matters that the Johns Hopkins University, for example, is telling me they not only will like our product, they want to become the first teaching hospital in the United States. Because when I go to the insurance company and I say, Johns Hopkins wants to be a teaching hospital, there's no insurance company that is going to say, well, I'm not going to reimburse Johns Hopkins. So that's my message. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We're going to spend, while we're waiting for the, we're just going to, if there are questions for Arun, while we switch from one to the other from a logistics perspective, any particular questions for Arun that people want to raise? No? It was a very, very interesting talk, very informative, and great amount of experience in there. Our next speaker is Martin Brouillette. Martin Brouillette is the founder and current CEO of SoundBite Medical. He's professor of engineering at the University of Sherbrooke.
Yes.
And there are a few interventional cardiology fellows and interventional cardiologists in the room. And we don't like calcium. Calcium causes us a lot of problems in our procedures as we're trying to get through various kinds of blockages. And SoundBite's come up with some very interesting technology to that end. And he's going to teach us about some of his experiences in terms of taking this Canadian company more broadly. So thank you very much for joining us.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Strauss, for inviting me. I'm very honored to be at Sunnybrook today, and actually humbled to speak amongst many different, very impressive companies. So I'm happy this morning to tell you a little bit about our little company, SoundBite Medical Solution. I'll give you a brief company overview. Then I'll present the technology, because I don't think many of you are familiar with the SoundBite technology. So I'll describe to you what it does and a few of our results. And then I'll describe what's our company strategy for the next couple of years. So SoundBite was created in 2015 from technology from my lab, actually. And it was founded by myself, two of my PhD students, and a very famous Medtech character in Montreal named Steve Arliss. Steve actually was a CEO for the first 2 years. Then I was named the CEO last June. Because we have a lot of CryoCat people, we have a very experienced team. We have world-class advisors, very famous people in the field of vascular intervention. The company was started on a $15 million seed round, and now we're up to 35 full-time equivalent people. And you're wondering, what all those people do? Well, we run actually our own clinical trials, so we're not subcontracting any of that stuff to CROs. We actually write and submit all of our regulatory filing. Again, we're not using any consultants to do this, because we're fortunate to have experienced people in-house. And I'm proud to say that we have an extremely strong engineering capability. And since they give me the podium today, so as a CEO, I have to tell you that we're raising money right now. Actually, we're closing at the end of the month, but we're leaving it open till the end of April for a second closing for those of you who would have some late interest to invest in SoundBite. So I had to plug this today. So basically, if you're not so fortunate from a genetic point of view, or you have a pretty crappy lifestyle, what's going to happen is that your arteries are going to clog up. Okay, and it's a very big problem. And this can happen in the heart, and this can happen in the legs. And basically, the preferred method to solve that problem is a procedure called angioplasty. So basically what you want to do is you want to run a very thin metal wire, okay? It's like a fishing line, basically. You want to run this through the lesion, and then this wire serves as a rail onto which you're bringing the rest of the equipment, which usually ends up being a balloon that you're using to dilate the artery. And then if you're worried about the arteries, you know, plugging back again, then you're going to leave a device called a stent to make sure that the artery is going to stay open at least for a while. Now in this disease, there's a lot of calcium, so that buildup of plaque inside the arteries becomes highly calcified, and this calcium is actually very hard. It's as hard as your teeth. Okay, so imagine trying to treat that with a fishing line. Well, it's not so obvious. And one of the problems that SoundBite addresses is what's called chronic total occlusion, is when the artery is completely blocked. There are some calcified caps that appear both on the proximal and distal end of the lesion. And then you're trying to basically cross a brick wall with something akin like a spaghetti noodle, okay, which is a guide wire. Now, what SoundBite does is we provide some mechanical energy to that noodle, allowing us to cross without disrupting your usual procedure. Now, in case you're interested, is there a big market for that? Well, Dr. Strauss is very familiar with this. He will tell you that it's a problem. And typically, it's a very difficult procedure to do. Typically, it's only attempted by 10% of operators. And in terms of value proposition that was discussed in the last talk, if you cannot cross an occlusion with a wire, then it's failure of the procedure, and then you may end up getting open heart bypass surgery, or in the legs, it might lead to, you know, leg amputation. So the value proposition for SoundBite is to turn failures into actually successes. And there are hundreds of thousands of addressable cases. Another problem that SoundBite attempts to address is calcium not in CTO. So even if you have what's called a stenosis, okay, not a full blockage of the artery, well, it's easy to run the wire, but maybe it's difficult to run other devices because there's no room. Or when you put the balloon, it's difficult to inflate the balloon. So calcium causes a big problem. And this is present typically in about half of the lesions. Again, there are like, you know, gazillion of cases. So towards that end, well, our technology addresses that through microcatheters and balloons that I will be presenting. So basically, the SoundBite device concept is that we have a console which is outside of the body of the patient, which produces shock waves. Shock waves are short duration, high amplitude mechanical pulses, okay, that we carry into a device, right now a guide wire or microcatheter, that goes to the lesion to be treated. So basically the shock wave is produced outside the body of the patient, is carried into the device, and when it gets to the distal tip of the device, it helps into crossing the occlusion or treat the calcium that is causing problems. So basically what's interesting is that we've invented a new way to produce shock waves. Normally shock waves are produced by rapid release of energy, let's say a chemical explosion or a powerful electrical spark. We didn't think that these were very nice ideas to use in a operating room environment. So what we do is we generate trains of thousands of small amplitude mechanical pulses produced with a piezoelectric driver. And we found a way to combine all of those pulses into a single large amplitude shock wave. And then this is fed into the connector of the device, where it's carried into either the guide wire or the microcatheter. And when it gets to the distal tip of the device, it produces what we call the micro jackhammer effect. And it also reduces the friction on the device. So, and this is all covered by IP. So we already have one allowed patent for the novel method for producing the shock waves, and we have 12 more filings covering anything from radiopaque markers, guide wires, microcatheters, balloon, you know, and the kitchen sink. So we have a console, which is a relatively simple piece of capital equipment, and then we have disposables, which for potential investors, these are high margin products. So the way it works is when the pulse gets to the distal tip of the device, it briefly accelerates the tip. Okay, and that's what causes the cracking of the hard material. Now, the amplitude of that motion is very small, is of the order of 1 micron, and it lasts 1 microsecond. Because of this, most of the time, nothing is happening because we're sending only 10 to typically 50 of those pulses per second. So there's no energy build up to the distal tip of the device, so you don't need to cool it, and there's no any temperature increase. And what's neat about the short displacement of the tip is that if you apply that to a healthy elastic tissue, well, it does nothing. Okay, so it's actually very safe for healthy tissue, but as soon as you hit something hard, it drills like crazy. Okay, so I'll just show you an example. So if you're fortunate to come to our facility in Montreal, we'll have you cross your own eggshell. Okay, so if you try to cross an eggshell with a guide wire, is impossible. Nobody ever succeeded. Okay, so that's it. We're just jackhammering our way through, you know, calcium. So, and if you're wondering, oh, it's just an eggshell. Well, an eggshell is as hard as your teeth. And if I had more time, I'd show you videos of we can drill through glass slides, you know, microscope glass slides. So we can drill glass. So as far as drilling, we can drill. Now, is it safe? Well, we've done all kinds of safety stuff, but I don't have time to tell you about that. But yeah, obviously, if you put it to your finger, it's not going to explode or anything. Okay, so it's very safe. So actually, we've done a first-in-man study for a peripheral CTO application. So these are complete blockages of the arteries in the legs. We've done 37 patients at 2 sites, one in Montreal, one in Sherbrooke, one in Austria with a very famous KOL over there. We've had 92% device success, which is really high. Compared to the normal success rate is 60% in those lesions, and then there are other devices that don't work very well actually, but then they can go up to 70 or 75%. And you can understand these CTOs can be very long, up to a foot long, you know, in the legs. And interestingly, we were able to cross 2/3 of the lesion just with our device, and it's quite unusual because normally physicians would take multiple guide wires to get through a CTO, and with an average device activation time of 3.5 minutes. So I'll show you just a couple of cases. So here's our actual first case ever done. Okay, so on the left is a CT scan of the patient. In the squares, there's no arrow. Is there a laser or something like this? No, that's okay. On the top. Okay, well, no, doesn't work. Anyway, so in the squares, you know, you see there's kind of a missing red part. It's like the artery is missing. That's because there's a CTO. Okay, so on the right, you see the angio during the procedure. So you see like there's an artery and then it stops and then it reconstitutes back there. So what we do is we just sit our wire on top of the proximal cap, put on the power, drill through, and then every time you hit something hard, well, you apply the energy and you just drill your way through to the end. Here's near the re-entry point. I don't know if you can see, there's a little black line. It's the distal tip of our wire. There's the mark on the tip. You see that the physician tries to re-enter and is not exactly at the right place, so was able to pull back. And the tip, you can shape it a little bit and you can steer it by rotating the wire, and he was able to re-enter with our wire, and then run a balloon over the wire and then treat the patient, and that patient was very happy. Actually, that was somebody that could barely walk 100 feet. Okay, somebody that you ask him to climb some stairs, he could climb 1 step. Okay, and the next day he went out of the hospital, went in the woods and chopped himself a nice Christmas tree. So he was fairly happy about the procedure. Here's another case, a live action, so severely calcified CTO, very short, 14 millimeter, but like a rock. Okay, and it took 26 seconds to cross that. So here again, if I had an arrow, I could show you, there's a part of an artery missing somewhere there in the middle. Okay, so what we do in the procedure, we run what we call the tap test. So we take a conventional wire and we tap at the occlusion to confirm that it's actually a CTO and you cannot cross it. And then we exchange for our device, and here you see the real-time crossing. So the energy is applied and the wire is gently moving forward. You just gently move it forward and it drills its way through the occlusion. And here the re-entry was done, but the physician wasn't sure if it was done at the right place. So he pulled back on the wire. And you see the wire is curved. So you can rotate it and then steer it to where you want to go. And there he thinks he's at the right place, flips it around, and here you go. So you saw in real time the crossing of that CTO. You understand that with conventional technology, this would have taken many minutes to achieve. So we're very happy about those 37 patients. We filed for CE mark, and we got an email last week telling us that we're getting the CE mark for that device. We also have a coronary product, which is just a thinner wire, so it's a 014 platform. We've performed a very nice animal study last year that was done at CRF Skirball. They have a coronary CTO pig model. So we've done 3 pigs, each one with a single CTO in the LED. Some very famous names as operators. A very successful study. So I'll just show you an example. So here's is one of the operators, Dimitri Kampaliotis from Colombia. I'll run it again. So you see he's trying to get into the CTO with a conventional wire, and you see that the wire is bending. Okay, it's because it doesn't want to get into the CTO because it's too hard. Okay, so now we exchange for our device and we turn on the power, and you understand that our wire actually likes the hard part. So as soon as you put it in contact with the hard part, it wants to get in, and you see it has penetrated into the proximal cap. We use the wire to proceed. So these were about 1-inch long CTOs. And then here's the re-entry point, and then you apply the power, poops, it goes back into the vessel. Okay, so all done with a single device. So we're ready to go for the coronary. We want to do our first patients in late spring. What's exciting is that over the past year also, we've shown that we can power multiple wires simultaneously, all connected to the same console. And then you can package these wires in various configurations. So these are various active, what we call active microcatheter devices. So a microcatheter is actually a small catheter that you're running over a wire, and you understand that you can use those to basically make a bigger hole. So I'll show you an example of such an application. It's called a balloon uncrossable lesion. So what we do is we drill a hole into a calcified plaque analog with our coronary wire. Okay, so we drill with our 14,000 platform. So here's a 14,000 hole. And then we put a wire in that hole, and then we attempt to track a balloon over that wire into that hole. And obviously there's no room. So what you do when you cross a CTO, or you have a very tight stenosis, but you cannot put any other device, well, what you do is you do this, you exchange for our device, and then you just drill your way through a bigger hole. That's it. Now you have a bigger hole, you can run whatever device that you want to do. Okay, and we have the so-called SoundBite skunkworks, who's working on other projects, balloons and drug delivery. And since it's all proprietary stuff, this is all I'm going to tell you about it. Okay? I'm going to talk about the plan because they've asked me to talk about commercialization. Now, the thing is, we're not doing any commercialization, and actually, over the next 2 years, we have no intention to do any commercialization. So I have to explain you why. Okay, so here's our plan. So basically, this may sound like a very confusing Gantt chart, but if you look in the middle, you have a green arrow, which is a peripheral CTO, pivotal. So we've done our 37 patients in Canada and in Europe. We're getting our CE mark. We went to see the FDA in September, and they told us we thought we need to do 100 patients to do a US pivotal study to get a 510K. And it turns out they told us we need only 50 patients, and they will allow us to reuse our 37 patients from the first in man. So what we are doing is a 5-patient pivotal study in Canada, for which we've already done 4 patients. And we're doing a 10-patient pivotal trial in the US, okay? And based on that, we're gonna get a 510K early next year. Now, what are we doing with this CE mark and 510K? Well, this gives you, you know, license to commercialize your device, but it turns out that commercialization is very complicated. And I think the next speaker will tell you a lot of, he has a lot of stuff to say about that. So we're fortunate that our investors don't want us to generate profits too quickly anyway. So over the next 2 years, we want to learn, okay, what's the clinical value proposition of our device such that we can position the device properly in the market. Like, for example, a good question that you need to ask yourself is how much are you selling the device? Okay, it's a good question. Well, it's tough to answer that question if you haven't, you know, talked to a lot of people and done more than your 50 patients from your pivotal trial. So it's our intention to do more trial, engage more people, and really demonstrate the real value proposition, and then we'll be ready for commercialization. And then in the middle, you have the coronary wire project. So interestingly, we went to see the FDA to do a first-in-man, and they didn't want us to do a first-in-man study. They want us to go directly in pivotal. Okay, so we're doing what's so-called a phase pivotal, and it's going to start this spring. And then the lighter green is the microcatheter first-in-man, which will take place in 2019. At the bottom in blue, you have what we call the post-marketing studies or strategic sales. So we want to go to Europe and the States to start engaging real sites to have the device used in real life clinical setting. And then the last activities at the top is to get ready for commercialization in 2020. Well, we need a more commercial ready device, both from a console and from a disposable point of view. So, hey, what do I know about commercialization? So, well, I'll tell you what I've learned. Okay, so first, you don't want to rush because you could just kill your product if you go too fast. And obviously, you need to know your product and the markets, and especially the regulatory and reimbursement landscape, which are very different from one territory to the next. Okay, very much different in Canada, the States, Europe, Japan, and then we heard about China this morning. Very, very different at each place. So what we want to do is we want to demonstrate a recipe for the peripheral wire. So we want to do limited commercialization, post-marketing studies, and then full commercialization in 2020. And we think that this will demonstrate that we can do it with the coronary wire and then the active microcatheter. So just what I've learned, you know, in the 2 years of the project, I can tell you that originally, you know, people tend to think, oh, Europe is very easy to get a CE mark. Okay, I can tell you this, it's become more and more difficult to the point where Europe will become more difficult than the States. Okay, so if you are thinking about, you know, where you want to go first, it's a real important thing. And in parallel, since nobody wants to do any clinical trials anymore in the US because it's perceived as being too difficult, they're easing off, okay, in the US, especially for technologies like us that address a very large unmet need and for which there are no other technology. It turns out that also you can leverage some outside of the US data for US regulatory approval. And if you want to go to Japan, there are ways to leverage US data when you want to go to Japan. Now, eventually, your adoption of the device will depend on the reimbursement landscape. Okay, so for those who are not familiar with that, is that every time a doctor uses your device, well, somebody has to pay for that. So it's either the hospital, the customer, the government, whatever. Okay, and it turns out that we're in it right now. Europe is a mess, okay, because every country has very different reimbursement strategy. And because of this, it's very difficult to say, okay, I'm going to Europe and think I'm treating Europe as a united or like a single country. It's actually a bunch of different countries that have each of them, you know, their own peculiar side effects. It turns out that, and it's usually the case in the US, at least the US is a big market and is a single country. Okay, so at least it's very clear for the US. And in our case, there are existing well-defined reimbursement codes for our kind of devices. So what's neat is that we don't need to go to CMS to try to create a new code or to get additional reimbursement. We're covered under existing code. And obviously, when you do your clinical trial, it seems pretty obvious, but it certainly wasn't obvious for us, okay? You need to tailor the clinical indication to whatever reimbursement indication that you want at the end, okay? You don't want to have a device that does X, but then the reimbursement is for Y, okay? So you want to do your trial for Y, and then it'll be reimbursed for Y. So that's pretty much what I had to say for today. So I thank you for your time. And if you have any questions, just jump on me at the break or during lunchtime. Thank you very much.
Does anyone have any questions for Martin? Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's great. That was very informative and is a great area where there's definitely some strong clinical need. Our next speaker is Louis Laflamme. He has a background in starting off in business administration and in accounting, and through a multitude of progressive stages in his career, ultimately ended up at a company that made some really good pressure sensors, and they were used extensively in the oil and gas industry. But around, I'd say 4 years ago or so, is when the company made a pretty strategic change to decide to go from oil and gas into medical technologies. And Opsens is another publicly traded Canadian.
Attention, please. With David Hill, please return to emergency orange zone. Attention, please. Attention, please. With David Hill, please return to emergency orange zone.
And Opsens has been very successful in terms of creating some relationships to commercialize its technology. It's building out its own manufacturing facilities in Quebec, publicly traded, and we're really delighted to have Louis come here to give a talk about his experiences in the space of medical technology commercialization. So thank you so much for coming today.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Thanks a lot, Brian, for the invitation. Thanks to all the committee for the organization of this event. You know, for Opsens, it's quite exciting to be here when I see all those you know, great ventures or great ideas, Coronary, great technology, and so on. Like Brian explained, we are coming from a different path in terms of becoming a cardiovascular company, because initially, you know, Opsens was founded based on a fiber optic sensing technology, where you could measure various parameters such as pressure, temperature, displacement in various applications. And obviously, my presentation will be oriented toward commercialization, but you will see how commercialization had an effect in terms of all the corporate development of Opsens. Because you know, when the company was founded, initially there was two technical founders. So one guy that was taking care of the oil and gas business, where, you know, we were unique in our capability to measure pressure and temperature at 300 degrees Celsius for more than 3 years. So very, very robust technology. While on the medical side, we were doing commercialization under the OEM business model. I mean, we were selling our temperature and pressure sensor to medical device corporation with the hope to see them doing commercialization of their product with our technology being integrated. You know, it's an interesting business model to start with in the context where you can generate, you know, rapid revenues. You don't necessarily need to invest massively in all the product development that you have to do if you develop a specific product for the market. The issue with the OEM business model is that you go at the speed of your partner. You go at the speed of your client. So if suddenly your project is no longer the priority, where there is not a lot you can do. And on top of this, I mean, the value perceived from investors, also the benefit that you provide to the patient is somehow a little bit distant to you. So at some point, Opsens made the decision, well, we felt, and we still feel like this, that we have the greatest miniature pressure sensing technology for medical device application. So we did a large market survey to really understand the need of pressure measurement in medical. And through that market study, we found an application where, you know, there was a very clear unmet need, where it was taking profit from Opsens core competencies, and that's how we changed completely the company. So from a company that was selling sensors, we became a cardiovascular company with a very unique product for a fractional flow reserve. So Opsens is today, and even if we have all of our history of industrial activities, today our core business, the value that we have on the stock market is, I would say, 99% related to the medical device business. So we are an emerging player in cardiology with a strong interest in commercialization. So we are doing commercialization today in the procedure that we call FFR, or fractional flow reserve, where in fact we compare pressure measurement before and after a coronary blockage. And with that information, you can calculate the ratio, and the cardiologist can make the right decision about the treatment of the patient. So today, Opsens is going after a market that will be $1 billion opportunity. So very significant market opportunity. Today, the FFR market is approximately 50% of that, so about $500 million. We've done more than 30,000 patients in more than 30 countries around the world. And the point there is that we were able to demonstrate that our product was safe. We are able to show, you know, very strong yearly growth in revenue year over year. But the most important thing is that we get recognition today in medical publication about the fact that Opsens is having the best FFR product in the market. Very strong IP, and also very proud of the fact that, you know, we don't forget our origin. I mean, our sensing technology is something very unique, very strong, and we also commercialize this still under the OEM business model with large medical device corporation. But the way we see this is that this is a nice complement to improve our financial performance, you know, improve our critical mass in terms of manufacturing, in terms of exposure in the market, but the core business of Opsens is clearly FFR. So this is a small introduction about Opsens to help you understand, you know, my position as CEO of Opsens. The goal of my presentation here will be more to talk about all the good and bad that we saw in commercialization. And here, the goal is to share my experience. I don't want you to think that I know it all. I mean, we are all learning. There was very interesting presentation on commercialization before me with Martin and Profound and so on. You know, it's a learning experience. You need to adapt to the market. So please take all my comments with some, you know, some consideration, but judgment. I will also discuss a few differences between markets, and ultimately the goal is to help you appreciate the potential of the international market for you know, future development. But obviously, with the presentation this morning about India and China, I think you already have a good flavor about that. So strategies for international expansion. You know, the first thing is to properly select your market. And when I say the first thing, obviously, a key success factor is to have a strong value proposition before that. Because, you know, if as a small cap company, when you tackle the big elephant, the big giant, if you don't have a value proposition, I mean, the challenge in doing commercialization will be very, very high, very, very difficult. In our case, and I could spend hours to explain you why we have the best FFR device. So please just take this as granted, and let's look more into the detailed strategy of commercialization. So the first thing is about market selection. And first reflex could be to say, well, we'll go after the biggest market first. And for FFR, the US market is 40% of the worldwide market. So obviously, it's a big market. The pricing is also very good in US. The volume are there. From an investor perspective, the valuation that you can get with a successful US commercialization is probably more significant than other revenues that you could generate in other markets. So those are positive things. This being said, we also need to balance this against some challenge in the fact that the US market may be more difficult in terms of the approach or getting your product in usage in the hospital, because obviously purchasing departments are involved all over the world in making or supporting decision to use one product or the other. This being said, in some country, the key decision makers are still the cardiologists, and Canada is a good example of that, where physician can strongly influence decision. While in US, the purchasing department are more important. So you need to consider that in your strategy in the context where, obviously when Opsens is coming to the US market, physician may know us, while the purchasing people never heard about this strange company coming from Quebec City. So you just need to consider that into your strategy, into the time expectation that you can have to penetrate a specific customer. Also, in our case, our competitors are corporations like Abbott that bought St. Jude Medical, or Volcano that was bought by Philips, or Boston Scientific. So, and honestly, it's a great thing for us to go against a big corporation in the context where they don't necessarily care as much as I about the FFR market. And we position ourselves as experts. The flip side of this is that obviously those companies have a lot of relationship with the US hospital. They have a huge history of doing business together. So this is an obstacle that we have to overcome. So in our case, the strategy initially was, okay, let's select a market to do the pre-commercialization phase. And in the case of the FFR procedure, the FAME study, so the clinical study that really established the credibility of FFR, was a study that was led by Dr. Nico Pels in Netherlands and Dr. Bernard de Brun in Belgium. So our strategy was to say, well, first, let's go and go after a market that would really know about the FFR procedure, really appreciate the value proposition of our product, and it will be also a great way to test everything we do in terms of marketing, positioning, and so on. So initially we went there. It's a good thing. It's a good decision that we made, and even we had, let's say, some room for failure. It was a great success, but we were saying, well, if it doesn't work on the first shot in Belgium and Netherlands, those are small markets, so it's not necessarily a big disaster for the company, while we can learn a lot. So the flip side is that since FFR was developed there was a strong interest in testing the product, but there is a huge difference between doing the testing and having adoption. And so we saw that over time. Obviously, it's an obstacle that we were able to overcome. But again, you need to consider this in terms of timing in your financial plan, in your strategic plan, and even the investor relation activities that you do. So the second market that we decided to go after was the Japanese market. And some rationale that we had there is that it's a market that is giving a lot of importance to have the best product in the market, and it's also a place where and don't get me wrong, I'm very positive about the Japanese physician, but they seem very agile to find any weakness or anything that could go wrong with your product. They will find a way to make it happen. So to test your product, it's a fantastic place. This being said, there is no room for quality issues. So you need to consider this in your market selection. And I'll talk a little bit later more about our Japanese experience. But let's tackle another key strategies about, okay, what's the way you attack the market? Because obviously you can hire your direct sales force all over the world, or you can use some corporation that are, having as core business to do distribution of products of, small cap companies. So one thing to consider is obviously the control on your destiny. Distributors, okay, they don't have always interests aligned with you. And I will just give you an example. We signed a distributor. The results were a little bit disappointing, and suddenly they began to sell, significant quantity of our product on a monthly basis. And we said, well, we felt good. We probably did something good. We support them. We trained them. The reality was not that at all. Is that they had other product line in their portfolio. One of this product line, the company went bankrupt. So suddenly they had more time to work on our product, and suddenly we had success. So even if we felt great, the point is that when you pick a distributor, you need to take measure, to try to do the best that you can to make sure that they are working on your stuff. Because, the Optowire of Opsens is our baby, and we really care about it. But it's not necessarily the same thing for a distributor, even if they will say all the good song of the world to you. The second thing is about, it's always more difficult to influence, a distributor or an employee of the distributor than your own force. So again, there is pros about distribution, but you need to understand that you have to stay very close to them, because suddenly the messaging, the positioning that you want to send worldwide may be affected by a distributor that is just having a different message or for other reason than what you want. And the other point is that if you are looking after an exit, having a distributor in some key strategic market may affect this exit potential. So China, India are countries that are emerging. So they may become much more important for strategic players. It doesn't mean you cannot do distribution agreement, but if you do that, it needs to be structured in a way where you have some flexibility, where you can protect your distributor because they have to invest in commercializing and doing the commercialization of your product, while also keep some flexibility. Second topic about distribution or direct, the credibility with hospital and purchasing departments. As a small cap company doing commercialization all around the world, obviously Opsens was not necessarily having this credibility. So in some cases, it was very useful to use distributor that already had business with other product, with the purchasing department, with physician. This was just helping the speed in terms of commercialization of our technology. On the other side, some key opinion leaders or even some buyers have they don't necessarily always buy from distributors. I met a key opinion leader in FFR that said to me, Louis, I really like your product, but I'm going to buy direct from you, whatever you do. So it's just making things sometimes a little bit more difficult. In terms of financial implication, revenue and cost, obviously, if you use a distributor, you are having a variable cost, because if they don't sell anything, you don't pay anything. or you don't share any of the ASP with them. If you have a direct sales force, it's fixed cost. But on the other side, you maintain in your hands the full ASP, which is, ASP and gross margin are obviously indicators that are highly looked at by investors. And there is about the time, the speed, the time to develop your sales channel. So in the case of Opsens, we had to be selective. We really like the direct business approach with the hospital, but for us, in the context of our financial resources, it was making sense to use distributors in Japan and Europe, where the culture is very different, where we did not have any close relationship with hospital, and it could just provide the possibility for us to keep our resources to attack in a direct manner North America. So one thing that was tackled by Martin just before me, and I think it's very interesting and it's applicable also to Opsens' story. I'm coming back again to the first roadshow that we did in Belgium and Netherlands. And, we were so excited after all those years of product development. Finally, we were going on the road to sell our product. We felt so good just before this week of roadshow. And the goal was we were going to visit 14 hospitals, and hopefully 2 or 3 hospitals would order maybe 20 units each, so we'd get an order of 60 at the end of the week. The results, we got 8 hospitals that order 400 units. Well, you can say, well, it's fantastic, and I felt so good. This being said, when you come back to the office, you need to make sure that your organization is ready for such success. We were able to deliver to our customer, but I could not say to you that it was something that was easy. There was some huge pressure on the manufacturing team, and the issue where you need to be very careful is that obviously as a small cap company, again, you have no room for issue with quality. So we could not sacrifice quality. It's not, when you have something like this in an organization, I mean, for your team, your employee, you can deal with that. But you should not forget that you also have some suppliers. And again, that's a place where your control is much more limited. So in our case, even if we had this huge pressure, quality was the priority over quantity at any time. And if there is some lessons that I want to share with you is that, we need to find the right balance between aggressive commercialization and fully controlled launch. So depending, and all technologies, all products are different. So you are the best one to decide what's the speed that you should go in commercialization. But one thing I can just reinforce in terms of message to you is that take the time to properly balance and consider the speed that you want to go. And also don't forget that ramping up production is a challenge. It's a challenge that we underestimated a few years ago. We are very comfortable where we are today and so proud of seeing the efficiencies of our production. But, there was time where we had to get better in training with employees. We had to get better in term of equipment that we use for manufacturing, because suddenly, equipment that were good when you were doing small quantities, when you produce suddenly 3,000 or 4,000 units a month, it's no longer working. Your employees are having some health issues and so on. So there is huge learning. And the third component behind a manufacturing ramp up is the fact that you have to deal with your suppliers. So if you have a learning curve on your side, don't forget that your suppliers will have the same thing. And again, that's a place where you need to make sure that they properly understand, the growth plan of the company to make sure they put the right resources behind this ramp up. Is there potential in the international market? So here we are looking at the revenues that we record in the fiscal year ending August 31st, 2017 for Opsens. And you can see, US, the fourth market in importance. Is it making sense when you look to the FFR worldwide market? The answer is no, because US is 40% of the market. But was it a decision by Opsens? The answer is yes. Is there a lot of opportunities for growth there? The answer is yes also. And now, in 2018 and 19, we see the US market as a major factor of revenue growth for Opsens. Canada, we are proud of our performance. As a Canadian company, we're able to commercialize our technology here. This is important because in some countries around the world, they would say, well, okay, you are saying to me that your product is so great. We are reading this publication, but are you doing some commercialization in Canada? So, it's a crucial part of our strategy. About Europe, you can see that we record in the fiscal year 2017 a little bit more than $3 million in Europe. Is it a good performance? I would say when we look to the detail behind this, and again, some presentation tackled this prior to me, but Europe is not one market. There is various different markets, and we get various different performance level. In Japan, Japan, and my next slide is around this subject. That's the market where we sell the most today. And we are very excited about this, but there is reason why we succeed in Japan. And there is still a lot of room for growth. So the story about the Japanese story is the following, is that, when I discussed at the beginning of my presentation about, the foundation of Opsens, the first customer that we got in the medical device business was a Japanese company looking to see Opsens develop a miniature pressure sensor. And we did that for them. They are not yet in commercialization for this product. So when I was saying the OEM business model is interesting, yeah, they can pay you, but they don't necessarily go at the speed that you want. We are 13 years later here. This being said, we built a relationship with them. There is mutual trust between those two corporations. So when we decided to sign a distribution agreement in Japan, there was various potential players. But guess who was the company that was the most aggressive in providing good financial terms to Opsens? Obviously, it's the same company called Xeon Medical, because they knew how powerful was this sensing technology. They had a huge confidence in the team. So in that context, they were...
Attention, please. Code Omega B Bravo Wing 64 Bed 1. Attention, please. Attention, please. Code Omega B Bravo Wing 64 Bed 1.
So I was saying they were probably a little bit more confident in providing good financial terms to Opsens in the context of this knowledge. For us, having a partner that knew about the Japanese culture, also a partner that had relationship with the key opinion leaders and hospital was also very useful. You also need to know, even if there was trust, we were working together since 8 years, and we had to do an agreement that was not necessarily that complex. Well, the Japanese culture is different than the Canadian culture. We have entrepreneurs that are very successful, that build multiple business, that were agile and doing multiple deals. When you deal in Japan, you have to be a little bit patient. It's not going to go at the speed that you are used to, and even if there is trust. So it's a slow decision process. They always need to seek another approval. So your patience will be trained. This being said, in terms of the average sales price in the market, very strong ASP. It's the country in the world where the ASP is the highest. There is some challenges in commercialization. Even if you have a partner there, they will need to use multiple layers of distribution. So you have to consider that in your plan. But the conclusion for Opsens is that the Japanese experience is great, and we need to continue to invest in the communication with this partner, because even if we know each other since a long time, communication at distance is delicate, and sometimes, as I'm sure you saw, English is my second language. English is their second language. So sometimes, you know, you need to make sure you probably understand each other. European market. Again, I don't want to repeat what you saw in other presentation. Each country are different, and we are getting very different performance in each country. You know, if I use the example of Germany, that's a market where, you know, imaging is very important. There is a lot of IVUS penetration. There is a lot of, you know, other similar technologies. It means also that some of our competitors are more present. That's a market where we have more challenge. We'll overcome that. We have a great strategy, but you need to know that while other countries in Europe, you know, we are getting very rapid growth. They are well educated into FFR, so it doesn't take a lot to them to understand the value proposition of our product. About the regulatory hurdles, and here I'm probably not fully up to date because we got the approval a little bit earlier. Yes, there is change, but at our time when we got the first approval, it was fairly easy. So the conclusion for Opsens there, we decided to use distributors. We decided to use not only one distributor for the full Europe, but one distributor that is good in his country. And after that, we take another company that is good in the other country. And honestly, it's a good way to balance the risk where we don't bet only on one guy. There is multiple guys that can deliver to us. There is always room to improve. You can sacrifice the bad performer and keep the good one. So that's the strategy that we had. And it's also key, even if you have distributors there, you need to have some direct resources to support them and to check them. About the US story, I mean, US is a market where the relationship with the hospital and physician is crucial. We decided to go with our a small direct sales force so far. It has been successful. We are glad to develop, you know, each month new customer. This being said, again, like I said at the beginning of my presentation, let's say if we go in UK, we knock to the door of an hospital, the product can be in the hands of cardiologists within a month. If you dream about that in US, it's not going to happen. I mean, the US market, it will take more time. There is various committees that will need to be involved, even if you have your champion, your key opinion leaders inside the hospital that is pushing. So on the other side, in US, there is key opinion leaders that have an influence all over the world. You also have that in Europe, in FFR, but in general, you know, there is some hospital in US that are very influential. So you can capitalize on this, and the investment in US can be somehow profitable for other markets. The ASP is very good. It's a competitive market. Like I said at the beginning, if there is a place where competitors are defensive, it's in US. You know, it may hurt them much less when we take an account in Ireland instead of taking an account in New York City. So the conclusion for Opsens is that we were able to show success with a small team. We are assessing right now what's the best way to achieve a larger commercialization. So is it to increase the size of the team or to use potential partners? Because the good thing for us is that FFR is becoming more and more strategic in the cath lab. So in that context, there is some players that, you know, are selling in interventional cardiology, but do not have any FFR product. And they see this as a disadvantage in the market. So in that context, we have great, you know, partnership opportunities that we are assessing. And again, there is various consideration there about what's the long-term strategy of Opsens, what's the value creation process, and what's also the most successful and quick way to success. So this was most of my presentation. I see that the time here, I don't want to put I may have here maybe 5 minutes less when I was talking about potential of the international market. So this is the market size in FFR. You can see that it has been growing year over year. Obviously, the Canada is probably 5% of this $450 million market. So just doing commercialization in Canada would not be enough to create value for shareholders. In our case today, we have a 3% market share. Obviously, it's not the same market share in each of our market, but we see tremendous room for growth in the context where the market itself in FFR is going to continue to grow. And there is a lot of room for us to gain market share over competition. Our product are guide wire, so slightly in terms of the positioning in the cath lab, this is coming before the SoundBite device when it's a completely blocked. In our case, it's more for intermediate lesion. It's a single-use device that goes in combination with the optomonitor, which is a permanent device installed in the cath lab. The value proposition here, we are having three main characteristics in terms of value proposition. And somehow we are capitalizing on the fact that we are using fiber optic against competitors that are measuring electrical resistance to obtain pressure measurement. So fiber optic, we have the most advanced sensing technology in the world. In terms of mechanical performance of the wire, in the context where fiber optic can be very small, we were able to insert inside our guide wire a nitinol tube, which is having a large diameter. So in that context, when you torque the device, you get a much better reaction than a traditional FFR wire from St. Jude or Volcano, where the mechanical performance is given by a small core member that is not concentric. Here, you won't see the video, but people talking about no drift with the Opsens device. The last component is that, again, we are capitalizing on our sensing technology where you can disconnect and reconnect your product at will and still get an accurate measurement. And in that context, it's providing to the cardiologist the possibility to have more freedom in the workflow that they want to use. Because let's say if they want to treat the first lesion, they can do that, reconnect after, and still get an accurate measurement. While competition, the pressure measurement is sensitive to the way the product is connected. So in that context, they don't like the idea of disconnecting and reconnecting, while just keeping the device fully connected is a challenge for them to have an accurate measurement. And this could be also a future path of growth where, right now FFR is used to assess if you should implement a stent or not, while there is also some clinical room for what they call post-PCI FFR. I mean, measuring FFR after the stent implementation to see if you really establish the blood circulation of the patient. Well, our product is suited for this, and we are confident we'll see more clinical data coming out of this application. Fantastic manufacturing facility in Quebec City. We like the idea of manufacturing in Canada. Our competitors at some point decided to manufacture in Costa Rica. And guess what? A few years after, they came back to US or other country because they had some quality issue. So in our case, we like to have the control on our manufacturing. We think it's part of the value creation in the company. Here on a consolidated basis, well, this is only FFR revenues. It's not on a consolidated basis, but again, you can see that we get a very good growth year over year. You can think when I look to 2015, it was a very successful year because at that time, the goal was not necessarily to maximize the level of revenue. It was more to have the control on the pre-marketing or pre-commercialization phase. So when we summarize about Opsens, it's the best product in the market, recognized by top key opinion leaders in the field. Commercialization is a crucial part of our strategy. We are going after US, Europe, Japan, and Canada. We need to build more clinical data in the future. We've used so far more than 30,000 devices safely in the market, which is different than the competition. There is a lot of opportunities for the company to get better in manufacturing process, to reduce the cost of goods sold. We expect to launch a new version of the device that will achieve this goal. And on top of this, we expect to see our sensing technology being commercialized by Abiomed, a $10 billion market cap company that will integrate our sensing technology for the US market in 2018. That's about it. So commercialization is a challenge, but it's very interesting.
Thank you very much. That's, it's great to see success stories like this where we've had a variety of early stage companies and some later stage companies, and it really brings a lot to the reality of the opportunity and the importance of this sector. And so I'm really grateful for all of the people that came by to give talks in this past session. So thank you very much. Let's give them one more round of applause. We do have just a few minutes. Are there any questions for any of the three past speakers? That anyone want to break the ice on the questions? Yes, please.
So my question is, hopefully all three of you will be able to comment. Our value proposition was very key and common throughout the session here, and you guys did a really great job of that. When we talk about the different international markets, let's start with the U.S. because it's all mentioned that big smiles on the U.S. market when you threw that up there. We're talking about a country that spends close to 17.9% of their GDP on healthcare. So there's an assumption that growth potential, my willingness to take $1 out of my pocket, spend it on healthcare, is infinite. In all of your value propositions that you spoke about, none of you mentioned how that value proposition transitioned into a net potential efficiency reduction, or perhaps something that could lead to reduction in healthcare costs to the general operations of the nation. Could each of you take a moment to share with us what the impact of your value proposition could be towards that pathway?
So just
we all know it is completely an unsustainable situation.
So just to repeat the question, and it's directed to all of the speakers. So maybe if Arun and Martin, if you can join us up here at the front. The question is, there's a finite amount of money that can be spent, and U.S. spends 17% of its GDP on healthcare. There's not an infinite pot for spending for these new technologies, and that's one of the things that we have to realize. And I'd like each of the question asked of the speakers was, what's their value proposition, and how does that fit in with respect to the limited budget? How do they get part of what's already there? Okay, you want to start?
So it's a very good point here. There was some limitation because there is a great meal that is waiting after us, but in our case, the FFR procedure is a procedure that somehow help to make sure that when you do a stent implementation, you make it at the appropriate moment, and just doing that represents some cost saving. In the case of Opsens, how we distinguish compared to competitors is that we position ourselves as a one-wire PCI, where you can use the Opsens guide wire from the beginning to the end up to delivering the stent over this device, which is different than competition. If I take the example of Volcano, they succeed in delivering the stent in 30% of the cases, while we are doing some clinical work right now to prove that we can succeed there at 90 or 95%. The other point is that it's a crucial. You are placing the end on a crucial topic. You need to have that. You need to have this value proposition in dollar in US. You just need to do that at the right stage. And in the case of Opsens, I would say the next 2 years we'll put significant resources behind this.
Actually, that's a great question. For SoundBite, I think that the value proposition towards that topic is very clear on two fronts. First is the first question you need to ask is, what are the alternatives? Okay, so if you don't cross a CTO, for example, with SoundBite technology, then you need to cross it with existing technology. And typically, these procedures are very long. They can take, I know in Japan, where they cannot resort to bypass surgery, okay, for cultural reasons, they're going to take 3-4 hours to cross a CTO with tens of wires, exposing the patient to, ungodly amounts of radiation, squirting a contrast agent that is not too good for your kidneys. So the alternative is that, or in the US, where they're not so patient, that patient may end up on the table with coronary bypass surgery, which if you compare the cost, you know, it's at least an order of magnitude more expensive. So I think at SoundBite, that's what we're pushing, is the fact that you're going to have faster procedures and you're going to be turning failures into successes. And I think that there's clear money savings associated with that.
So, thank you. You know, I think it's a very interesting question with the premise that it cannot go on forever. But if you look at the cost of healthcare in US, the growth is coming primarily from new, very expensive drugs and chronic diseases, right? So the fact that the population is growing and diabetes is becoming big and these chronic diseases are becoming really big. And again, if you stratify this data, what you will find is people who are, where the healthcare dollars are being spent are in age group of 75 plus. And so I think that you do need to dig into the details and really understand the proposition from the perspective of your own innovation, and not really, to be honest, not worry about the bigger healthcare picture. Having said all that, I do think that, for example, when we go to the market, we do talk about the fact that our product will overall be less expensive. And I think that there is certainly a undercurrent that says that if you have a product that will significantly increase costs, that it will have difficulty. But I would strongly suggest that you look at your own situation and focus on the different kinds of values, the patient value, the surgeon value, and then the value to the payers. The payers definitely have gained a lot more power in the last 5 years than compared to history. So the likelihood, the way they're dealing with this is not very logical, to be honest, at the moment. All they're really doing is delaying new technology adoption. So I do think over time they will start to have better processes where they'll start to look at quality of care and at lower cost. But I still think that you should focus on your own innovation and your own story. Thanks.
Thank you. And I think just to add to that, the places where they spend the 17% of their money on healthcare today are going to be on very different things where they spend that same 17% in 15 years. And you want to step into that process as they start having shorter hospital stays, as they start spending less in certain areas, shorter procedure times, fewer complications. You want to be at the innovative stage that refreshes where that significant amount spent on healthcare is going to be over the course of the next 10 to 20 years. All right, well, we've got lunch. So thank you everyone for a great session, for participating, and please enjoy the lunch, and we'll see you back here shortly thereafter. Thank you.